But even if they had, 129 men were unlikely to survive. The Inuit who came there to hunt rarely traveled in groups of more than 20. That was all the human life the island, 100 miles across, would support. Five weeks after his arrival, Amundsen encountered Inuit hunters for the first time. Armed with a gun and 2 words of greeting, they approached.
When they were 200 yards away, they halted. Then there flashed through my mind, heated with excitement of warfare, the word Taima, and I shouted it at the top of my voice.
Taima! Taima! Taima!
In a moment, we flung away our rifle and hastened towards them, embracing and patting each other. It was hard to say on which side the joy was greater.
You here? You here? Live here?
The next morning, when the Inuit returned to their camp, Amundsen went with them.
When we came within sight of the village, the Eskimos began to shout. I could catch only one word, Kabluna, white man. It was a strange scene. I shall never forget it. Out in the desolate snow landscape, I was surrounded by a crowd of savages, staring into my face and grabbing at my clothes. I was suddenly brought face to face with a people from the Stone Age, who as yet knew no other method of making fire than rubbing 2 pieces of wood together. We came here with all our ingenious inventions and firearms to people who still used lances and bows and arrows. But their tools, apparently so primitive, were as well adapted to their conditions as experience and the test of many centuries could have made them.
In the Victorian age, there was no use talking to the Eskimo. That didn't make you a great explorer. The Victorians wanted to prove that they were better than everyone else, that they had values to export. Perhaps it was a little bit ignoble to learn from people who ate their meat raw. In Amundsen, there was a totally different mentality. He saw the local people as people who offered the solution to that world. They belong to that landscape. There's no point in fighting it. It provides them with their food, their shelter, their medicine. It's all about seeing the place simply as a home, simply as a place that offers you everything.
That night, Amundsen slept inside a village's igloo. The Inuit beside him were naked, covered only by their fur skins. Outside it was -10. It was his first lesson in the Inuit art of survival. As the crew settled in for their first winter in the Arctic, Amundsen's preoccupation with the Inuit grew. To the amusement of his crew, he began to live and dress as they did. When he sweated in his old woolen clothes, they'd freeze as hard as a board. In these loose, light skins, he found he was warm and barely sweated at all.
Warm. It's warm. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
It was the beginning of his education by a people perfectly adapted to life on the ice.
We set about learning the art of snow hut building. Taking hold of a monster knife with both hands, we cut the ice blocks. The snow must not be too brittle, as all the blocks will crumble. The hut is built in a spiral like a beehive, so that one layer rests on the previous one and extends a little further forward. Many a snow block did I get on my head when I tried this work.
As the months passed, the Inuits' lessons in Arctic survival grew more and more intricate.
Seal hunting begins sometime in February, when the snow falls heavily and the seal cannot hear the steps of the huntsman. They find the seal's breathing holes out on the ice, but to detect the seal, they must use an ingenious device. They take a bunch of swans down and attach a single thread to a hook with two claws. Then they lean forward, keeping their eyes riveted to the hole. As soon as the seal comes within yards of the hole, the movement of the water sets the swans down in motion. That is the signal.
Hard.
The Inuit were teaching Amundsen to see the Arctic with new eyes. Beneath the frozen landscape that killed Franklin and his men, there was a hidden world teeming with life.
In the spring, there are fat salmon and reindeer. In the autumn, unlimited cod. And yet in this Arctic Eden, those brave travelers died of hunger. They must have stopped here and seen for miles before them the snow-covered land and no sign of life. There is not another place in the world so abandoned and bare as this in winter.
Crew of the Joa, Amundsen's fascination with the Inuit was increasingly proving a distraction from the purpose of the voyage. In the spring of 1904, the first signs of a thaw appeared in the bay.
The ice is clearing.
After 6 months in the Arctic, the crew were eager to resume their attempt on the passage. But Amundsen had other plans.
So we should be able to move on in a couple of weeks, maybe a week if we like.
We're not finished here.
But the ice is clearing. It may be our last chance.
He realized the skills he was learning from the Inuit would give him an expertise in polar survival that few explorers could rival. Learning to master the ice and snow was becoming an obsession.
The crew didn't really understand what was going on with Amundsen. He likes more to go with the Eskimos. And then he's forgetting his crew and have no interest in his work. He wanted to fight against hunger, coldness, to show his greatness as a man. It's a landscape of death in a way, and he wanted to win over the death.
Above all, Amundsen was now convinced that the Inuits' dogs were the key to survival. Earlier that year, during the bitterly cold weeks of March, he'd set out on a 90-mile journey to test his theory.